you're talking with somebody about no commerce, because I know post-purchase surveys, at least in the D2C space, are somewhat newer. Is
Mhm.
that fair to say?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yep.
Yeah. What are some of the ways that you tell brands they'll benefit from post-purchase service, just from a high level before we really go into like all the details of it?
Yeah, for sure. So the biggest thing is you're getting to hear directly from your customers, and one of the things that I like to talk about is that really your objective is not necessarily to find out from them what the objective truth is. So you're not, uh, for instance, if you're asking somebody, how did you first hear about us? The reality is there's a good chance they saw an ad or had some sort of touch point with your brand prior to the first time they actually remember learning about your brand. So what you're looking for in that context is really to understand what is the thing that's most impactful to that person. And that's true of any type of question, right? If you ask somebody, which of these things do you care about most? The reality is you're getting the thing that they care about most in that moment. It may not be the
Hmm.
thing that they care about most tomorrow or the thing that they cared about most a month ago. So that's the thing that we like to talk about a lot is you get to hear directly from your customers and you really understand their sentiment, how they feel. And that's really what you're looking for, not necessarily what is the factual truth about everything.
Yeah. And do you see it as another touch point or a good source of truth for marketing attribution as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I'd say that's the primary use case is actually that for our customers.
For marketing attribution. Yeah. And one thing we do within our agency, because creative strategy, creative production is
Yep.
one of the things, is looking at the voice of the customer. So we look at,
Mm.
customer reviews and Reddit threads, which get
Yep.
pretty interesting, to plan out.
Filtered.
Yeah, it's very unfiltered. To plan out what we want to do for the creative strategies. And, post purchase surveys can be another great opportunity for that,
Hmm.
right? Is there any questions that brands go with or that you've seen brands go with that can help really guide customers into giving them the insights they're looking for?
Yeah, for sure. I would say, um, generally speaking, you want to be very specific with what you're asking and you want to push people into deeper layers of response. So that's like very high level. That's the way that we think about it. So, um, I'll use the example of, let's say you're trying to understand the retail purchase behavior from your customers. And not that your website is the best place to understand that, but if you're trying to understand the relationship between the two, it's a really good place to do that research. And so you could actually go survey your customers and ask them a question like, have you ever bought our product in a store before? And that is what you're really looking for is probably a ton of additional insight that goes beyond that. That's a really good starting point. And so then based on what they answer with that question, then you can go deeper. So let's say you're a brand that's commonly found, you're a food and beverage brand that's commonly found in natural foods stores, right? So you're going to then ask a follow-up question and you'll ask something like, which of these stores have you seen this in? And you'll put all your stores that you're in. So Sprouts, Whole Foods, natural grocers, right? So all that kind of list. And then you might ask additional follow-up questions from there. Things like, okay, how often do you buy our product in store? Why did you choose to buy our product online instead of in store? Which flavors do you normally buy in store? Things like that, right? And then you can start to get a much deeper, better picture. So that's like for us, we really recommend that people get as specific as possible and then dive as deep as possible to really get at like those core things that are important to understand. So it's one thing to understand if your customer is buying in store or not. It's a whole other thing to actually understand like what it is that motivates them, what's actually driving in store versus online purchases, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, and that's super helpful because as a marketer, it can be very easy to get lost in the data or get lost in the numbers. And then you just start building a lot of assumptions
Yeah.
that you then have to build out a lot of plans and marketing strategy for to just validate those assumptions or not. Whereas if you have, zero party data, you can kind of curve a lot of time
Yep.
with that. Do you have any stories or examples of brands that thought data was telling them one thing, maybe who was
Yeah.
purchasing or that, but through a post purchase survey, they were able to see something else from
Yeah.
it?
Absolutely. So I won't share the specific brand. I think it's public info, but just in case. So there's a brand that we work with that is very popular among teenage girls. And so they did this whole study a couple of years ago where they looked at credit card data. So basically, like matching up credit card data from purchasers with demographics. And what they found was that the majority of their customers were women between the ages of, I think it was 35 and 54 was the group there. And that was the vast majority of their customers. And so they started to build marketing campaigns around that. I said, okay, great.
Hmm.
We know that, women between the ages of 35 and 54 love our product. And so they started building campaigns and strategy around reaching that demographic. After turning on Knocommerce, they actually found that those bracelets were being purchased by 35 to 54-year-old women, but the majority of the recipients of those were actually teenage girls. Or in many cases, it was also the teenage girl buying with mom's credit card, right? So the teenage girl's actually going on the site and buying, but it's mom's credit card. And so what they ended up finding was that it's their actual demographic is teenage girls, right? Call it 13 to 25 as like the prime demographic for them. So it had a massive impact. They took that information, looked at, and completely shifted their strategy, knowing now that both things were kind of true, right? Like the credit card is 35 to 54-year-old woman, but the actual target is the teenage girl, and it's probably also mom, targeting ads towards mom in the context of this is for your teenage daughter, right? So that was kind of, I actually don't know the details of exactly what they did with all of that data, but I do know that they completely changed their entire strategy based off of that information.
Yeah, I imagine they would, change their creative if they're using
Yep.
UGC or influencers, a lot of that mix.
Yep.
Yeah, that would be an interesting boardroom meeting.
Yeah.
After
I
that,
wish I could have been in the room for that one.
yeah,
It was great. I mean, they were kind enough to share some of the details of that, but I thought that was really cool. And like for us, it's when somebody's paying us a relatively insignificant fee to help optimize millions of dollars in ad spend. I'm always happy when they get those kinds of wins.
yeah. I was at, I know we were talking right before this, the Commerce Roundtable event this week, and there was a group up on stage talking about post-purchase surveys, and
Yeah, that was our like
one of the
panel. Yeah,
Yeah, one of the brands mentioned they were a clothing shirt brand. I may or may not be wearing one of their shirts right now, but they said they got a survey, and in the survey, it said that someone was in a bar fight
yeah,
and he
heard that.
found a shirt on the floor, picked it up, felt how it felt, liked it so much that he went and bought, I think, like 5 shirts from their website. Facebook or Google Analytics would never tell you that,
No,
right? Like
no way.
and that's something that they could totally use for an ad creative, or you know what I'm saying? Like that's just
Yep.
great insight there.
Yeah, I'm actually
Um,
very curious if they turn that into an ad because I definitely would.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it reminds me of something Liquid Death would do with their type of creative.
that's true. Yeah,
I think that would be good. And there's a lot of opportunities with post-purchase surveys. I didn't know honestly until I started using the tool through clients and things like that. The ability to segment questions or surveys by purchaser. So first time purchaser, second time purchaser, third time purchaser. I'd love to just hear from you a little bit. Like what's the mindset behind that, and how
yeah,
do you see strategies changing at each purchase?
yeah. That's a good question. So I think I'll go a little bit higher level on this actually first before I dive into that
Yeah.
specific thing. So one of the things that makes our platform pretty unique is this ability to break down data based on what we call audiences. And everybody has their own definition of what an audience is, but for us, it's basically a group of customers who fit some sort of criteria. So we have order criteria, so things like product purchased, number of purchases, amount they've spent in the lifetime, all that kind of stuff. We have some customer criteria, so things like location. That's probably the most used one actually in that kind of category, but there's a bunch of smaller ones you can use as well. And then things like questions answered is also a common one. So, if somebody said they first discovered you on TikTok, would create an audience of those people, and then you can filter all the rest of your data based off of that. So like where that gets really cool is looking at things like the relationship between responses to a question that how long did you know about us before placing your first purchase, and how did you first discover us? When you look at those, you start to see things like Google purchasers. People who discover you on Google typically purchase within 24 hours versus somebody who finds you on TV. It might take them, a month to a year to purchase. So that's really the goal, is just dive a little bit deeper, specifically with order, like number of orders. It starts to get really interesting there because this, I'm sure, but the majority of purchases are only going to make one or two purchases for most brands, right? That's like getting them to number two is really hard. Getting them beyond number two is still really hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
But once you get somebody beyond purchase number two, oftentimes you're going to get to 5, 10, 20 purchases, depending on your product, obviously, but for most semi-consumable products. And so in the context of like, what is your number of, how do you think about number of purchases and the questions you ask? What we often see brands doing that's really effective is having a survey for first purchase. And it's usually focused around things like attribution. So where does somebody discover you? Maybe some light demographics data to try to understand who's buying from you, and to be able to see the relationship between all those things. And use case data is also really interesting too. So maybe a question about, usually it's tailored to your brand, but a question that helps you better understand how somebody's going to use a product. I think HexCloud was saying that they do this where they have a question asking somebody what they're using the pans for when they buy pans. And so like that's a really interesting use case. You can funnel that data into your CDP or your ESP and build some segmentation and targeting around that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. Or that's usually kind of the approach to the first order. Second order is often focused. What we see and what we see working really well is questions that are focused around why somebody chose to buy again, because there is often there's some sort of aha moment or some sort of win that your product had in order to get that person to buy for a second time, and that can be really valuable for ad creative, and because it's going to do two things. One, it can actually like help you ad creative and also like product feedback, right? So it helps you better understand like what are those things in your product that are actually getting people to want more of it. And then if they really loved it, a lot of times they'll say things about the product that are really valuable for ad creative. So second order is oftentimes focused around that. And then beyond that, it really depends on what your objectives are, right? So we see a lot of brands asking questions around product, what's the word I'm looking for? Innovation. So product innovation sort of questions, product life cycle questions, how often are you using this product, those kinds of things. Obviously your amount of data that you're collecting drops off the more you're getting, second, third, fourth order purchases, just because you typically have fewer customers buying like that. But that's usually the way that we see it go. And one thing that I've seen be really interesting in this context too is looking at consumables that are like a supplement, where it's literally designed to be used for 30 days, right? So you've got your 30-day usage, and then typically somebody's coming back for another purchase in 30 days, or you got them on a subscription. But either way, you're typically getting another order out of them. And so I've seen things like NPS type questions, which are pretty cool. So literally tracking like the effectiveness of what that product is doing. So how does like I guess this is technically a scale question on the NPS question. We have both on our platform, but on a scale of, let's say it's a pain supplement of some sort. Yeah. Like today, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you describe your pain today? And then, on first purchase, if somebody's like, it's a 7 or an 8, then, on second purchase, it's only a 6. On third purchase, it's a 4. Like that's really good data for you to have as a brand too, to be able to be like, hey, look, as our customers are, using our products, their level of pain is decreasing. And you could literally show like that chart that shows the change over time.
Yeah, and one thing that that brings up for me is there was a CBD brand that I was speaking with, and I've
Mm.
spoken with multiple brands on here. They're subscription focused. That sometimes if there's no immediate effect or feeling like instantaneous, people can drop off from subscription because
Yep.
they forget what they don't realize that what they're using could be benefiting them, right? So I mean, in the medical world, think of like SSRIs or something like that,
Yep.
to where there's a long term. And one of the brands that I was talking to, which is like a fitness program,
Mm.
he was saying that they have what they call non-scale victories, which is like figuring out what the people are trying to do emotionally. So, get an extra loop in the belt notched, or be able to walk up the stairs without getting winded, and then keeping tight or keeping close to that to measure personal victory versus just
Right.
weight or inches or something like that.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And so that is actually potentially a good use of a survey question, right? So if you
Mhm.
know, let's say there's 5 to 10 of those things that are kind of standard, maybe somebody has an other thing as well, but if let's say 90% of people, their primary thing that they want is going to fall into a really nice multiple choice or question, that's something you could literally use for segmenting emails then and ask those people on a regular cadence, hey, how's this going for you? How's this going for you? That kind of a thing could be really easy to do.
Yeah, and I think with the Hexcloud reference you were talking about earlier, I think I remember he was saying they look at like understanding someone's dietary habits, because you wouldn't,
Yep.
in his words, want to send like a steak recipe or steak
Yep.
video to somebody that's vegan. Like that would just
Yeah,
be an
that was,
immediate turn off.
I remember that too. And I was like, man, that's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to be doing that.
Yeah, and so when it comes to the surveys, people are setting these up, especially for brands that are newer to it. I believe if these metrics are right, people expect about a 45% response rate and about an 80% completion rate for surveys. Is that
Yep.
about the benchmarks?
Yeah. So just to kind of break that down a little bit more, it varies a ton based on like the types of questions you're asking and all that kind of stuff. But what we see is on average 45% first question response. And then typically on our platform, people are running, I think the average is right around 5 questions per survey, but we
Mm-hmm.
see people running anywhere from 3 to 10 questions usually on a survey. And the completion rate on average is 80%, or 80. It's a little higher than that. I think it's 87, but let's just call it 80 plus. So in that context, then we, let's, I don't know. So it's 3 questions a survey sort of thing is kind of what's being actually answered. And then our system is pretty cool too, in that you don't have to finish the survey to collect the data. So something like a type form, like you actually have to answer all the questions and hit submit. For us, every question basically is auto submitting in the background. So if let's say somebody puts a 20 question survey on a website, and the customer answers 3 questions, you still get the data on the
Mm-hmm.
3 questions. So most of the time, if you're just looking at the data of that question, then there's no downside to that. The only thing that can happen sometimes is if you're trying to filter down deeper and create segments and audiences based on specific questions. Maybe you have less data on question number 10 than you do on question number 1, but
Mm-hmm.
there's not really a negative to it.
Do you by chance see any trends with um, completion rates or anything like that based on like generation or age range, or any type of demographic
Yeah,
like that, or does it stay consistent?
this is a question we get a decent. Uh, it's a regular question we get. I would say so. Up until this point, we don't have any evidence that that's the case, but that's really hard to know, right? Because if, let's say, survey respondents are biased towards being older, which I don't think is the case just based on the data that we have. But if that were the case, it's hard for us to know because we don't know who's seeing it and not answering it, right? So that's the downside.
Sure.
We
Yeah.
actually have some stuff we're working on that will help us unlock that with fairly good reliability. But I would say just from the data that we have, I mean, brands typically, when a brand is asking like demographic survey questions in their survey, you see that the demographics line up well with what the brand would expect, right? So, like the example of the brand that I gave earlier, if it's mostly, it's mostly teenage girls that are answering the questions. And then I've seen other brands we work with that are geared towards, retirees basically, and it's mostly people 55 plus answering the surveys.
No.
So I think from what I've seen in the data, uh, there isn't any significant bias in that regard. But we just haven't had, we have a method coming soon that will allow us uh, to actually reliably check for that. But as of right now, we don't have any way to reliably do that sort of research.
For sure. Well, that'll be awesome. And, you know, one other thing that I heard frequently at Commerce Roundtable, you were just talking about something that might be in the pipeline. People were talking about surveys, post-purchase surveys, and I heard a few times interactive surveys. Not saying I heard this from No Commerce, just interactive surveys in general, to where like in an email, if you vote,
Yep.
you can see what other people voted.
That's correct.
Is that or any other, exciting things in the pipeline for No Commerce?
Yeah, that is on our feature list for sure.
Okay.
I think the challenge with that is it's almost a whole different business, right? Like
Yeah.
email interactivity is a whole different beast. So we are working on that, but it'll probably be powered by somebody else. So that is in progress, loosely in progress. It could be 6 to 12 more months before that's actually ready, but that is being worked on. On our end, what we're building is really focused on helping deliver better insights to brands in two ways. One, opening up some additional ways to ask questions. So, for instance, this is coming out very soon, today-ish. We have a new question type where you can actually upload images and videos and let people select between images and videos.
Oh,
That's
wow.
pretty cool. So the idea is like a couple of things. One, product research type stuff. So
Yeah.
what products are you most interested in? The other one is ad recall functionality. So especially for bigger brands that are spending, 10 million a month on TV, you
Hmm.
have zero insight into which asset. Not, I shouldn't say zero. That's kind of unfair, but you have very little insight into which asset is actually driving the purchase. But you're probably only running a handful of ads, right? So if you can actually upload those ads and ask those customers which those ads they saw, that can give you another layer of insight on top of what the connected TV providers can give you. So because they're basically basing the data off of when something was run. They know which ad was run at what time,
Hmm.
and I guess to which IP addresses if available. But it's another data point that could be really valuable in that regard. So we're working on a lot of those kinds of things and just unlocking more insight into the data itself.
That'll be awesome. Do you have one data point that you think would surprise most people or that you were most surprised to see?
Yeah, so the most there's probably more shocking data points, but I would say that the most important one that I've seen that's almost universally true is that it takes people longer to buy than you think it's going to take them to buy. And so what we see across our system is that only about 40% of people say that they discover a brand and buy from that brand in the first week. So when you look at the way that we look at ad buying in the context of paid media, typically you're looking at an attribution window that's 7 days long or shorter. But what we see from our standpoint is that the majority, especially like higher funnel discovery channels, the majority of that is actually coming after that 7 day window. So TikTok, YouTube, connected TV, Instagram, those ones in particular, it's usually taking somebody much longer than a week to make that purchase. Um, and so to me, the reason that's so important is just understanding that, if you put $1 in today, you might only get $1.50 out in the next 7 days, but that might actually be worth $3 over the next 3 months. And being able to scale ad budgets with that kind of insight, I think is really helpful for brands.
Interesting. Do you see yourself? I don't even know if this would make sense because I don't know all the technicals, but do you see yourself ever API connecting with like TikTok or Facebook Ads Manager?
Yeah, so we have a partnership and integration with TikTok right now
Uh-huh.
where if a brand is working with both of us and wants to send data to TikTok, they can.
Mm,
Right now, I believe that's kind of exploratory. I don't think um, I can't really speak to like when or how that might be used on TikTok side, other than just like helping these individual merchants better understand what's going on. But
mm-hmm.
I hope that at some point in the future, we'll actually be able to show that data in the ads manager for TikTok. Um,
Uh-huh.
so that's the way that that is structured right now. And then they also get ad credits. So we don't have anything like that with anybody else at the moment. It's just TikTok, but that is a pretty cool partnership though. People get ad
Yeah.
credits, so it's up to $5,000 in ad credit to turn on our software. Plus, they can basically do better research for you if you're one of the bigger spenders with that kind of data as well.
I love that. Yeah. How do people get that credit? Just through their support or?
Yeah, so through your TikTok account manager, through us at Knocommerce, we actually do have. I guess I can send this to you later. There's a try.knocommerce.com is kind
Mhm.
of the landing page we've set up for that. So somebody can actually hit that landing page and fill out a form essentially to get into that program.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's depending on how much you're spending, it's typically $2,000 or $5,000 in ad credit.
Nice. That's awesome. And so, if you had to summarize everything that we've talked about today into a marketing mindset, little shameless
Mhm.
ploy on the
Yeah.
podcast name there, what mindset should marketers or business owners have when it comes to post purchase surveys?
Uh, that's a if I was gonna summarize it, this isn't quite what I want to say, but progress over perfection, I think is kind of like one way to say it. Uh, what I believe every marketer should be doing is thinking about the data from the standpoint of their customer. So thinking about what is the customer's actual behavior. If I'm showing an ad on TikTok, put myself in the shoes of the person who's seeing that ad. What am I thinking about? What am I doing? What is my behavior at that moment? So that's kind of one side of it. And the other with that is this idea of like you should be looking at multiple data sources and that no data source is perfect. And that's kind of where I was really going with that. But surveys are not a perfect way to measure the success of an ad. Click attribution or pixel attribution, MTAs, those kinds of things are not a perfect way to measure success. MMMs are not a perfect way to measure success. In platform data, like none of them are perfect. So look at a few different sources and see what the data is telling you. I think uh, I think this was stated by somebody at the conference as well, but just in case I won't say explicitly who this was, but there's a brand we work with that uses MTAs for understanding ad effectiveness and then
Hmm.
surveys for understanding where to actually put the ad spend. Because what they find is that there's actually an inverse relationship for them between what the ad level data that what the channel is saying on the purchase end of it is actually different
Hmm.
than what the discovery process is saying from
Hmm.
this point of initial discovery. And so that's a really interesting finding. And that's not that either of them is wrong. They're just measuring different things. We're really focused on measuring what's the discovery touch point. What is that point in the relationship that the customer remembers first finding your brand? And that could have been 5 years ago. For some brands, it literally is like that.
Hmm.
And usually it's not the thing that actually drove the purchase today, right? It's not the ad that they saw on TikTok today that made them buy. So I think that's kind of the way I look at it. Like none of this is perfect. Put yourself in the mindset of the person who's actually seeing the ad when they're seeing it. Think about what they're going to be thinking about and how they're going to be acting, and look at multiple data points. And to me, the survey is that kind of just a key piece of that whole mixture.
I'm in the rapid fire round, but two questions just popped up
Yeah,
and we have time. So I got to ask these for you really
cool.
quick. First question, I'll make them rapid fire, but which channel do you generally see being the quickest for discovery to conversion or first touch point to conversion?
Google and word of mouth. Word of mouth obviously is like a
Mhm.
little harder to control, but certainly Google is the fastest for like Google search for paid discovery.
Okay. And then the second question, I remember someone on stage talking about this, or it might have been somebody in the crowd talking about it during the no commerce panel, but how many survey inputs do you feel need to happen for a specific comment or specific feedback or something
Mm.
to validate prioritizing them in
Yep.
Q1 through Q3 versus Q4, if you will?
Yeah. So are we talking about like, you know, somebody answering a specific channel to how did you first hear about us? Or
Well, that usability errors on
oh, yep.
website or, just things that could be a fire
Yep.
or could be a blockage, but maybe not.
Yep. Generally speaking, so here's how I look at it, and this is imperfect, just like everything else we do. But I would say if you're seeing 1% of people typing something in, so 1% of respondents typing something in, you should add that to your multiple choice list if you have that. Um, so like if you have a question that's multiple choice with another option, if 1% of people are putting the same thing into other, 1% or more, that should be added to your other selections because the actual number of people who will probably select it is going to be much higher just because a lot of people select other and then not actually do it. They won't actually fill it out. So that's the way I see that. And then similarly, if you're under, it depends on what your objective is. Like maybe sometimes you've added a new thing, you have it as a multiple choice option, and you're building up from there, right? So in that context, it's fine if it's under 5%. But anything that's under 5% response, you should consider cutting it out if it's not a focus of yours, right? So cut that out as a main response. Let somebody type it in if they want to. So I kind of look at it in terms of percentages more than like raw numbers,
Okay.
just because like the raw numbers are going to be very different if you're doing 1,000 orders a day versus 10 orders a day.
Yeah.
Does that answer that question?
No, that's very good. Good. And then for anyone listening that's at the stage of figuring out what they'd like to do in the marketing industry, what marketing role or roles do you think will have the highest demand in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I honestly think AI focused roles, right? And I still don't even know exactly what that looks like, but somebody who knows how to leverage AI for faster creative production. And I'm sure you probably heard this talk at the roundtable. There was discussion about like, AI not being good at creativity. And that's absolutely
Mm,
true, but a creative person with AI in their hands,
can do
there's a
it.
lot they can do, right? So I think
Mhm.
to me, the number, like if I was 22 years old again trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I'd be diving deep on AI and trying to understand like how I can leverage that for actually really good creative, um not just the garbage creative that it will produce by default.
Yeah, because I mean, hey, Photoshop's not good at creative on its own. It
Yeah,
takes a
absolutely.
good designer.
Yep.
So
Same concept really. It's just that, you know, the what is it, Mid Journey. Mid Journey
yeah,
versus Photoshop is very different.
yeah, I'll say Canva on its
Yeah.
own because that one's a little more. The difference really is just it could do it on its own.
Right.
So, and then last question, tell us where can listeners connect with you or learn more about No Commerce?
Yeah, so knocommerce.com, KNO commerce.com is our website. You can find me, Jeremiah Prummer, on I almost said TikTok. I don't use TikTok. Not
You
up
in
to this
the
level anyway.
D2C Twitter
Twitter,
space?
yes.
Yeah.
Twitter, LinkedIn, all those places. So you will not find me on any other place really. I'm a text social media guy.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Jeremiah, I appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate it.